My name is Maren Bellamy, and the night my stepmother called me illegitimate before the entire Bellamy family, I did not collapse, protest, or beg anyone to defend me. I simply rested my fingers over the sealed envelope inside my purse and let Colette Bellamy keep speaking, because every vicious sentence she delivered was dragging her closer to the ruin she had carefully earned. For 12 years, she had treated my existence like a permanent blemish on the Bellamy name, something to be corrected, hidden, or quietly erased. She poisoned my father's silence, trained my stepbrother Camden to mock me with polished cruelty, and twisted my dead mother's memory into a scandal nobody dared to question. Colette loved telling people I was not a real Bellamy. She loved watching their eyes change when she called me a child with uncertain blood. But that evening, standing beneath the chandelier with champagne in her hand, she smiled and said, "Blood matters, darling. Some people will never truly belong." What she did not know was that my mother had left behind a DNA report, a notarized confession, and one devastating truth powerful enough to tear Colette's perfect life open in front of everyone who had ever believed her. Welcome back to Pure Drama Stories, where family secrets, painful betrayal, quiet revenge, and emotional justice come together with deep commentary woven into the story itself. Tonight, you will hear how one daughter stayed silent for years, until her mother's hidden DNA report turned a stepmother's cruel lie into her own public destruction. Now let me take you back to where it really began, long before the chandelier, long before the champagne, and long before Colette Bellamy realized that the girl she had spent years dismissing had learned the one thing cruel people always underestimate. Silence can look like weakness from a distance, but up close, it can be discipline. I was 19 when my mother, Isla Bellamy, died, and grief had barely settled into our house before Colette began moving through it like she had been waiting for the walls to forget my mother's name. She did not throw Isla's photographs away immediately. That would have looked heartless. Colette was too intelligent for obvious cruelty. Instead, she moved them slowly. One frame from the mantel to the hallway, one portrait from the hallway to a guest room, one wedding picture from the guest room into a box marked storage. That is how erasure usually begins. Not with a scream, not with a slam door, not with one dramatic act that gives everyone permission to object. It begins politely, gradually, almost reasonably, until the person being erased starts to feel dramatic for noticing. My father, Preston Bellamy, called it moving forward. Camden called it making the house less depressing. Colette called it healing. But I knew what healing looked like because my mother had been gentle even when life was cruel to her. Colette was not healing the house. She was rehearsing ownership. And every time she replaced another piece of my mother with something expensive and cold, she looked at me as if I were the final item that still needed to be removed. My mother had been the opposite of Colette. Isla Bellamy was not loud, glamorous, or hungry for attention. She was the kind of woman who remembered what people drank without asking twice, who placed birthday cards in the mail 3 days early, who could make a room feel warmer just by entering it. She had married my father when he was still building Bellamy and Vale from a small consulting firm into the polished family business people later praised at charity dinners. She had stood beside him through bankrupt months, late rent, exhausted mornings, and every uncertain year before the Bellamy name became something people spoke with admiration. But after she died, Colette told the story differently. In her version, my mother had been fragile, unstable, difficult, and secretive. In her version, my father had been merciful for keeping her. In her version, I had not inherited pain from losing my mother. I had inherited suspicion. The first time Colette called me illegitimate, she did it with a smile over Sunday dinner. I still remember the clink of silverware, the smell of roasted chicken, and Camden leaning back in his chair like he had been waiting for entertainment. I had asked my father if we could keep my mother's blue china cabinet in the dining room. Colette dabbed her mouth with a napkin and said, "Maren, darling, I know you are attached to things that make you feel connected, but not everything in this house belongs to your little version of history." My father frowned, not at her, but at me, as if I had created the discomfort by existing too loudly. Then Colette tilted her head and added, "Some family lines are cleaner than others. We should all be careful what we claim." The room went quiet. My fork stopped halfway to my plate. I looked at my father, waiting for him to say my name with certainty, waiting for him to place one protective sentence between me and the woman who had just placed a stain over my mother's grave. He did not. Preston Bellamy studied the tablecloth as though truth might be embroidered there if he stared long enough. Camden laughed under his breath. Colette smiled wider. The insult hurt, but the silence educated me. It taught me that betrayal is not always the person holding the knife. Sometimes betrayal is the person watching you bleed and calling it peace. That night, I went upstairs to my mother's old room, closed the door, and cried into one of her scarves until I could barely breathe. I was 19, still young enough to believe a father's love should rise automatically when his child was wounded. But love, I learned, can become cowardly when reputation enters the room. My father did not stop loving me all at once. He simply chose comfort over courage so many times that eventually the difference stopped mattering. Over the next 12 years, Colette perfected the lie. She never said it too directly when outsiders were present. She was careful, controlled, elegant. At garden luncheons, she would introduce Camden as Preston's son and me as Maren from Preston's first marriage. At fundraisers, she would laugh softly and say, "Blended families are complicated, aren't they?" At Christmas, she put Camden's stocking beside my father's and hers, while mine hung on the far hook near the kitchen entrance, as if I were a guest who had overstayed grief itself. When relatives asked why I looked more like my mother than my father, Colette would pause just long enough for the question to become poison. Camden grew into the golden son she had designed. He was charming when money was watching, lazy when work was required, and cruel whenever he knew no one important would object. He had my father's last name, my father's credit cards, and Colette's talent for insulting people without raising his voice. He called me the museum piece because I still kept my mother's letters. He called me the charity daughter because I worked outside the family business instead of waiting for an allowance. Once, when I was 26 and had just been promoted at the private research archive where I worked, Camden raised his glass and said, "Congratulations, Maren. It must feel nice to earn something with a name that is not fully yours." Everyone laughed because Camden's jokes were expensive, and expensive jokes are rarely challenged by people who benefit from the person telling them. I learned to stop reacting. Not because the words stopped hurting, but because reaction was exactly what Colette wanted. She wanted tears, raised voices, desperate explanations. She wanted me to look unstable enough to prove the role she had written for me, so I became careful. I watched. I documented. I remembered dates, phrases, rooms, witnesses. I stopped expecting my father to rescue me and started asking why Colette needed me discredited so badly. When someone works that hard to make you look like a lie, it is often because your existence is standing too close to their truth. I did not understand that at first. I only knew that Colette's hatred had a strange urgency to it. She did not simply dislike me. She needed me doubted. She needed my mother's memory blurred. She needed my father embarrassed by both of us. That kind of cruelty is rarely random. It usually has a purpose. The first clue came from my grandmother, Rosalie Bellamy, on a rainy afternoon 3 years before the gala. Rosalie was my father's mother, a woman with silver hair, sharp eyes, and the uncomfortable habit of saying less than she knew. She had never openly defended me, but she had never joined Colette either. That day I visited her after work, bringing groceries and the lemon tea she liked. She watched me unpack the kitchen bags in silence before saying, "Your mother was not as helpless as they like to remember." I froze with a carton of eggs in my hand. What does that mean? Rosalie looked toward the hallway, as if even her own house had ears. It means Isla knew when a woman was circling her marriage, and she knew when that woman was building a lie before she had the courage to live inside it. I set the eggs down carefully. Are you talking about Colette? Rosalie did not answer directly. She opened a drawer, took out a small brass key, and slid it across the counter. Your mother left something in my safety deposit box. She told me not to give it to you unless Colette ever used the word blood in public. My chest tightened. Why would she say that? Rosalie's face softened, but her voice stayed firm. Because your mother knew Colette's favorite weapon, and she wanted you to have the shield only when the wound became public enough for the truth to matter. I wanted to ask 100 questions, but Rosalie lifted one hand. Not here, not today. Take the key. When you are ready, call Julian Mercer. He was your mother's attorney before he became the family's quiet problem solver. I carried that brass key home in my coat pocket like it was warm. For 3 days I did not use it. Some truths terrify you before they free you. Part of me was afraid the box would confirm every ugly whisper Colette had ever planted. Another part of me feared it would reveal something even worse, that my mother had known everything and still died carrying it alone. There is a strange cruelty in delayed truth. You want it desperately, but once it is near, you understand it may rearrange your entire life. On the 4th morning, I called Julian Mercer. His office sat on the 12th floor of an old brick building downtown, above a bank and across from a courthouse. He was younger than I expected, perhaps early 40s, with calm eyes and a voice that made panic feel unnecessary. When I placed the brass key on his desk, he did not look surprised. He only nodded, as though a clock set years earlier had finally struck the hour. "I promised your mother I would wait until you came to me," he said. "Then she knew?" I asked. "She knew Colette was saying I was not my father's daughter?" Julian's jaw tightened. She knew Colette intended to. The safety deposit box contained 3 things: a sealed DNA report confirming Preston Bellamy as my biological father with 99.99% probability, a notarized statement from my mother describing Colette's threats, and a second sealed file marked Camden. I did not touch the second file at first. My hands were already trembling from seeing my own name printed beneath my father's, as if science itself had reached back through 12 years of humiliation and placed a hand on my shoulder. My mother's statement was worse, not because it was shocking, but because it sounded exactly like the life I had lived. Isla wrote that Colette had been involved with Preston before my mother's final illness became public, that Colette had demanded Preston leave the weak wife and the questionable daughter, and that when he refused, She threatened to make people wonder whether I was truly his child. My mother had ordered the DNA test quietly, not because she doubted herself, but because she understood how easily a dead woman can be slandered when she is no longer present to defend her own name. Then I opened the file marked Camden. Inside was a private investigator's report, old photographs, hotel records from years before Colette married my father, and a DNA analysis connected to a man named Derek Sloan, Colette's former business partner. Julian did not let me jump to conclusions. He explained it slowly, professionally, almost mercifully. My mother had not originally searched for Camden's paternity. She had been investigating the threats against me when she discovered that Colette had hidden her own pregnancy timeline. Camden had been born 8 months after Colette married my father, but the records showed Colette had been pregnant before the wedding. Later, after Camden became an adult, a legal dispute involving Derek Sloan's estate triggered genetic documentation. Julian had obtained certified copies through proper legal channels because Camden had once made a claim connected to Derek's family trust and then withdrawn it. Camden Bellamy was not Preston's biological son. For a long time, I could not speak. It was too perfect and too terrible. Colette had spent 12 years calling me uncertain blood while building her entire status on a lie much larger than the one she accused my mother of carrying. She had trained a family to question me while hiding the truth about the son she placed above me. She had mocked my mother's honor while using my father's name to polish her own deception. I looked at Julian and asked, "Why didn't my mother expose her?" His answer was quiet. "Because she was dying. Because she still loved your father. Because she hoped decency would arrive before destruction became necessary. That is the heartbreak of good people. They often give cruel people one last chance to become human, and cruel people mistake that mercy for weakness. My mother had not wanted revenge. She had wanted protection. She had wanted me to survive the lie if Colette ever made it public. And for 3 years after I found those files, I still did nothing. Not because I was afraid, but because truth is not a firework. Used too early, it becomes noise. Used at the right moment, it becomes judgment. That moment came at the Bellamy Foundation Gala. The gala was Colette's favorite night of the year. She loved charity when it came with photographers, applause, and her name printed in gold letters. That year, the foundation was announcing a new scholarship in Camden's honor, funded by assets my mother had helped build before Colette ever entered our lives. Colette wanted the evening to look like a coronation. She had planned everything: the white roses, the string quartet, the champagne tower, the speeches about legacy and bloodline. She even sent me an invitation with my name printed incorrectly: Maren Isla, no Bellamy. When I called my father to ask if it was a mistake, he sighed and said, "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I almost laughed. "Harder for whom?" He did not answer. He rarely did when the question required courage. I wore a dark green dress my mother had once said brought out my eyes. I pinned her small pearl brooch near my collarbone and placed the sealed envelope in my purse. The original documents were secure with Julian, but the copies inside my purse were enough to remind me why I was walking into that room. Sage Monroe, my closest friend, drove me there and waited outside because she knew I might need one person in the world who had never once asked me to prove I deserved kindness. Before I stepped out of the car, Sage reached over and squeezed my hand. "You do not owe them softness tonight." "I know," I said. "No," she replied. "I need you to know it in your bones." I looked at the hotel entrance, at the glowing windows, at the line of people who had spent years smiling at Colette's version of me. I do. Inside, the ballroom smelled of roses, perfume, polished wood, and money pretending to be virtue. Colette stood near the stage in a silver gown, accepting compliments like offerings. Camden moved beside her, handsome and smug, already practicing the expression of a man born to inherit applause. My father stood a few feet away, older than I remembered, tired in a way that made me feel pity before anger returned to correct it. Colette saw me and her smile sharpened. "Maren," she said, kissing the air near my cheek. "How brave of you to come." "Why wouldn't I?" I asked. Her eyes flicked to my brooch. "Still wearing relics, I see. Some relics are worth preserving." Camden laughed. "Careful, Mom. She might file you in an archive." I looked at him calmly. "Only if you become historically relevant." For 1 second, his smile slipped. It was small, almost invisible, but I saw it. Colette saw it too, and hatred flashed behind her elegance. She moved closer, lowering her voice so only I could hear. "Do not embarrass this family tonight." I looked directly at her. "I was going to say the same to you. There is a moment before justice when the person who hurt you feels a change in the air but cannot name it. They recognize your calm, but not its source. They sense danger, but their pride translates it as disrespect." Colette stepped back, still smiling for the room, but her fingers tightened around her glass. The speeches began at 8. A board member praised Preston's leadership. Another praised Colette's grace. Camden accepted compliments for scholarship work he had not done, using phrases like family legacy and responsibility to the next generation. Then Colette took the stage. She looked radiant under the chandelier, every inch the elegant wife, the devoted stepmother, the guardian of Bellamy respectability. She spoke about heritage. She spoke about values. She spoke about protecting the family name from confusion and compromise. Then she looked straight at me. "In families like ours," she said, "blood matters. It is not everything, of course, but it is the beginning of truth. Some people are born into a name. Some people attach themselves to it. And some people, no matter how long they stand near the portrait, will never truly belong." The room shifted. People knew exactly whom she meant. Some stared at their plates. Some glanced at me with the old, trained suspicion. Camden smiled openly. My father closed his eyes for 1 brief second, then opened them and did nothing. My fingers touched the envelope. I stood. The room quieted, not because they respected me, but because public discomfort is its own kind of theater. Colette's smile froze. "Maren," she said lightly, "this is not the time." "That is interesting," I said, my voice steady enough to surprise even me. "Because for 12 years, you have chosen every time. Dinner tables, Christmas mornings, hospital corridors, charity lunches, family photographs. You have always decided when my blood was available for discussion." A murmur moved through the ballroom. Colette's face tightened. "Sit down." I did not. The first act of revenge is not exposure. It is refusing the role they assigned you. For years, I had been the embarrassed girl, the doubtful daughter, the quiet wound at the edge of the room. That night, I became the witness. And witnesses do not ask permission from liars. Julian Mercer rose from a table near the back. Colette saw him, and for the first time all evening, real fear crossed her face. My father turned sharply. "Julian, what is this?" Julian walked forward with a leather folder in his hand. "Documentation, Preston." Colette laughed, but it came out too thin. "Documentation of what? Maren's dramatics?" I looked at her. No, Colette. Documentation of blood, since you value it so much. The ballroom became so quiet I could hear the fountain in the lobby beyond the doors. I opened my purse and removed the envelope. This was left by my mother, Isla Bellamy, not because she doubted herself, not because she doubted me, but because she knew one day you would weaponize a dead woman's silence. My father whispered, Maren. I did not look at him, not yet. For 12 years, you let your wife imply I was not your daughter. You let her turn my mother's name into gossip. You let Camden laugh. You let relatives pause before calling me family. Tonight, I am going to remove the pause. Julian handed Preston the first certified copy. My father opened it with shaking hands. His eyes moved across the page. Once, twice. Then his face collapsed in a way I had once dreamed would satisfy me. It did not. It only made him look smaller. DNA analysis, Julian said clearly, for the room. Preston Bellamy is confirmed as Maren Bellamy's biological father with a probability exceeding 99.99%. The report was ordered by Isla Bellamy before her death and notarized with supporting identification. Someone gasped. Camden stopped smiling. Colette lifted her chin. This proves nothing except that Isla was paranoid enough to test her own husband. I turned to her. My mother tested him because you threatened to lie. There is a difference. Julian opened the second document. There is also a notarized statement from Isla Bellamy describing direct threats made by Colette Bellamy prior to Isla's death, including threats to question Maren's paternity publicly if Preston did not distance himself from his first family. My father looked at Colette as though seeing her through glass that had finally cracked. You told her that? Colette's face reddened. She was sick. She misunderstood things. I laughed once. It was not loud, but it cut through the room. Of course. The dead woman misunderstood. The grieving daughter overreacted. The silent father was trapped. The elegant stepmother was always innocent. Cruel people survive by making every victim sound unreliable. They do not merely deny the wound. They question the witness, blur the timeline, decorate the lie, and trust that exhaustion will do the rest. Colette pointed at me. You have always wanted to destroy this family. No, I said. I wanted to belong to it. That was my mistake. Camden stepped forward then, angry now that the room was no longer laughing with him. Enough! You proved your little point. You are Dad's daughter. Congratulations. Now sit down before you embarrass yourself more. I looked at him for a long moment. The second envelope felt heavier than paper should feel. Camden, I said softly, you should not enter a conversation about blood unless you are certain yours can survive it. His face changed. Colette's glass slipped slightly in her hand. My father looked between us. What does that mean? Julian did not move until I nodded. Then he opened the second file. Colette said, No. It was the first honest word I had ever heard from her. Julian's voice remained calm. This certified file relates to Camden Bellamy's paternity records, including evidence connected to a prior legal claim involving Derek Sloane's estate. The documentation indicates that Camden is not the biological son of Preston Bellamy. The sound that moved through the ballroom was not a gasp. It was a collective rupture. Chairs shifted. Someone whispered Camden's name. Preston stepped back as if the floor had tilted beneath him. Camden looked at Colette, waiting for denial, but her face had gone pale in a way no expensive powder could hide. That is a lie, Camden said. Julian placed the papers on the podium. It is not. Camden turned to my father. Dad? My father did not answer. For the first time in my life, his silence punished someone else. Colette's polished mask broke slowly, then all at once. "Preston, listen to me. It was before we were settled. It was complicated. You were grieving. I did what I had to do." I stared at her, almost amazed. "You did what you had to do? You let your son inherit a name you knew was built on a lie, and then you spent 12 years calling me the stain?" She turned on me. "You think this makes you better?" "No," I said. "It makes you finished." Justice does not always feel like victory when it arrives. Sometimes it feels like standing in the ruins of a house you once begged to enter, realizing the door was never locked because you were unworthy. It was locked because the people inside were afraid of what you would see. My father finally looked at me. Tears stood in his eyes, but they did not move me the way they might have years earlier. "Maren," he said, "I am so sorry." I wanted to say that sorry was too small. I wanted to ask where that sentence had been at 19, at 22, at every holiday when he watched me shrink under Colette's smile. But the room was full of people, and I had not come there to beg him to understand pain he had helped create. "You are sorry because the truth is public," I said, "not because the truth is new." He flinched. Rosalie Bellamy stood near the front, one hand on her cane. She looked older than she had that morning, but her voice was steady. "I told Isla the truth would find its hour." Colette turned toward her, betrayed. "You knew?" Rosalie's eyes hardened. "I knew enough to be ashamed of my son and patient with my granddaughter." That sentence landed harder than any shout. Preston lowered his head. Camden moved toward the side exit, but reporters from the local society magazine were already standing near the doors, phones in hand. The scholarship banner behind him, printed with his name in gold, suddenly looked like evidence instead of honor. Julian stepped to the microphone. For clarity, the Bellamy Foundation Board has been provided with certified documentation regarding misrepresentation relevant to tonight's scholarship designation and associated donor materials. Any decisions regarding naming rights, asset distribution, and foundation governance will be reviewed formally. Colette's eyes widened. "You cannot do that." Julian looked at her. "Actually, we already did." I had not known that part until that moment. Julian later told me Rosalie had insisted. My grandmother had quietly contacted 2 board members weeks earlier and asked them to attend prepared. Colette had believed the gala was her stage. She had no idea the floor beneath it had already been measured for collapse. Camden ripped the scholarship ribbon from his jacket and threw it on the table. "This is insane. I did not do anything." For the first time, I felt something almost like sympathy. Camden had been cruel, but he had also been raised inside Colette's lie. That did not absolve him. It only made the wreckage wider. "You did plenty," I said, "but this part was not yours to choose." He stared at me, confused by mercy he had never earned. Colette began crying then, but even her tears seemed offended by their own existence. She reached for Preston. "Please, we can discuss this privately." I looked around the ballroom. "Privately? Like you discussed my mother privately? Like you questioned my blood privately? Like you trained an entire family to doubt me privately and then smiled in public while I carried the damage?" She had no answer. Privacy is often the final shelter of people who spent years making someone else's humiliation public. They call exposure cruel only when truth stops serving them. My father stepped away from Colette's hand. It was a small movement, but it ended a marriage more clearly than any lawyer could have in that room. Colette saw it and understood. Her power had never been beauty, money, or even manipulation. Her power had been Preston's refusal to confront her. The moment he withdrew his silence, she became only what she was, a frightened woman surrounded by proof. I picked up my mother's pearl brooch between my fingers. My mother was not a scandal. She was not weak. She was not a woman you could bury under perfume and lies. She built this family before you learned how to perform inside it. And I am not uncertain blood. I am Isla Bellamy's daughter. I am Preston Bellamy's daughter. But more than that, I am the woman who stopped asking this family to tell the truth and brought the truth with me. No one clapped. This was not that kind of victory. Some people cried. Some looked ashamed. Some looked angry because truth had forced them to remember their own cowardice. I did not need applause. Applause would have cheapened it. I walked off the stage before anyone could decide what emotion was appropriate. Sage was waiting outside the ballroom doors. She took one look at my face and opened her arms. I did not cry until I reached her. Not because I regretted anything, but because even righteous strength has weight. I had carried my mother, my childhood, my name, and my silence for so long that once I set them down, my body did not know how to stand without them. Later, the fallout came in waves. Colette moved out of the Bellamy house within a month. Preston filed for divorce and stepped down from the foundation board pending review. Camden disappeared from public events and stopped using the Bellamy name on social media for a while, though I heard he later met Derek Sloane's relatives and learned the truth Colette had stolen from him too. Rosalie transferred my mother's remaining personal effects to me, including the blue china cabinet Colette had once tried to remove. Julian helped me establish a small scholarship in Isla's name. Not for legacy children or polished families, but for students who had been doubted, displaced, or forced to prove they belonged in rooms that should have welcomed them. My father asked to meet me 6 weeks after the gala. I agreed, not because forgiveness had arrived, but because curiosity had. We sat in a quiet cafe where no one knew the Bellamy name. He looked older without Colette's confidence beside him. "I failed you," he said. "Yes," I replied. He swallowed. "I was ashamed." "Of me?" His eyes filled. "Of myself, and Colette knew how to use that." I looked at him for a long time. "She used what you gave her." That hurt him. I could see it. But I had spent too many years protecting him from sentences he had earned. Healing does not require you to soften the truth, so the person who hurt you can survive hearing it. Sometimes healing begins when you stop managing their guilt and finally let reality stand at its full height. He asked if we could start again. I told him we could start honestly, which was not the same thing. I did not move back into the family. I did not pretend one public apology could rebuild 12 private years. But I allowed conversation. Boundaries are not bitterness. They are architecture. They show people where the walls should have been all along. On the anniversary of my mother's death, I returned to the Bellamy house alone. Colette's silver furniture was gone. My mother's photographs were back in the hallway, not because Preston had earned that restoration, but because Rosalie had ordered it with the authority of a woman who had tolerated foolishness long enough. I stood before my mother's portrait and touched the pearl brooch at my collar. "I did it," I whispered. The house was quiet, but this time the silence did not feel like abandonment. It felt like respect. For years, Colette had wanted me to believe that blood was a gate she could close. She had used the word like a weapon, polished it, sharpened it, and placed it against my throat whenever she wanted me small. But in the end, blood did not save her. A name did not save her. A chandelier, a gown, A public smile and a room full of trained silence did not save her. The truth survived my mother's death. It survived my father's cowardice. It survived Colette's cruelty. And when the hour finally came, it walked into that ballroom in my purse, sealed in an envelope, waiting for the woman who loved bloodlines to drown in her own. That is what I learned from the night my stepmother called me illegitimate. You do not have to scream to reclaim your name. You do not have to become cruel to defeat cruelty. Sometimes you only have to stay steady long enough for the truth to arrive with documents, witnesses, and perfect timing. My name is Maren Bellamy. I was never the stain on that family. I was the proof they were afraid to read. Now that Maren Bellamy's story has reached its end, let's sit with it for a moment. Because this was not only about a DNA report, a stepmother's public humiliation, or one dramatic reveal inside a beautiful ballroom. Those things made the ending powerful, yes, but the real weight of this story was hidden much deeper. This was about what happens when a family allows one person's cruelty to become normal. And be honest for a second. Haven't we all seen this somewhere? Maybe not with a DNA report. Maybe not with a gala or a lawyer standing beside the stage. But we have seen families where one person keeps making small, poisonous comments, and everyone else keeps pretending they did not hear them. That is what made Colette dangerous. She was not the kind of villain who screamed across the room and made herself easy to identify. She was polished. She was careful. She understood timing. She knew exactly how to wound Maren without looking cruel. And that kind of person can be very hard to expose, because from the outside, their behavior can look like concern, humor, tradition, or just the way they talk. But for the person being targeted, it is not small. It is not harmless. It is erosion. Every comment takes something. Every silence confirms something. Every family dinner becomes another place where the victim learns that truth does not matter unless someone powerful is willing to defend it. And let's talk about Preston for a moment, because his role matters. A lot of people may look at Colette and say, she was the real problem. And yes, she was cruel. She manipulated. She lied. She attacked a dead woman's reputation and a daughter's identity. But Preston's silence gave that cruelty a home. He did not create every lie, but he allowed those lies to breathe inside his family. And that is something we should not ignore. Sometimes the most painful betrayal does not come from the person insulting you. It comes from the person who knows the truth and still chooses comfort over courage. Think about Maren at that dinner table when Colette first suggested she was not a real Bellamy. Maren looked at her father, waiting for one sentence, not a speech, not a dramatic defense, just one sentence. "That is my daughter." That was all he had to say, but he did not say it. And when a parent refuses to protect a child in that moment, the child does not only hear silence. The child hears a decision. The child hears, "My peace is more important than your pain." That is a wound that does not disappear quickly. Now, what I really respect about Maren is that she did not let pain turn her reckless. She could have screamed. She could have exposed Colette the first day she found the documents. She could have run to the entire family and demanded apologies. But she understood something many people learn only after years of being hurt. Truth is powerful, but timing decides how deeply it lands. If Maren had revealed the documents in a private room, Colette would have denied everything. She would have twisted it. She would have called Maren unstable. She would have turned the evidence into another excuse to attack her. So Maren waited until Colette did what cruel people often do. She became too confident in her own lie. And that is the turning point, right there. Colette did not fall because Maren forced her to talk. Colette fell because she could not resist using the same weapon one more time. She had used blood for years as a way to make Maren feel small. She used it at dinners, in introductions, in family conversations, and finally at the gala. But this time, the word came back to her with evidence attached. That is why the revenge felt so satisfying. Maren did not invent a scandal. She did not create a false story. She simply allowed Colette's own language to lead everyone to the truth. And audience, this is where I want you to really think about something. Have you ever noticed how some people choose one word to control you? Maybe they call you dramatic. Maybe they call you selfish. Maybe they call you ungrateful. Maybe they say you are too sensitive. And after hearing that word again and again, you start defending yourself against a label instead of dealing with the actual harm. That was Colette's strategy. She wanted Maren trapped inside the label, illegitimate. She wanted Maren so busy proving her worth that no one would look at Colette's deception. That is a very common tactic in toxic families. One person creates the accusation, then forces the victim to live under it. But Maren's mother, Isla, understood the danger. And honestly, Isla may be one of the strongest characters in this entire story, even though she was not alive during the main events. She knew Colette's cruelty before everyone else was willing to admit it. She knew that after her death, her daughter would be vulnerable. And instead of leaving Maren with only memories, she left her protection. A DNA report, a notarized statement, a legal record. That matters, because love is not only soft words and warm moments. Sometimes love is preparation. Sometimes love is a mother saying, "If I cannot stand beside you when the lie comes, I will leave something behind that can." That part is deeply emotional because Isla's protection traveled through time. She could not stop every insult. She could not sit beside Maren at every dinner table. She could not make Preston stronger, but she made sure the truth would not die with her. And that is why Colette's biggest mistake was underestimating a dead woman. She thought Isla's silence meant absence, but Isla's silence was not empty. It was sealed, signed, and waiting. Now let's discuss Camden, because his position is complicated. Camden was cruel to Maren. He laughed at her. He enjoyed her humiliation. He used his place in the family to make her feel like an outsider. So no, we do not excuse him. But at the same time, the reveal about his own paternity shows how deeply Colette's lies damaged everyone around her, including the son she claimed to love. Camden built his identity on a name his mother had weaponized. He thought he was standing above Maren, but he was standing on a secret Colette had never allowed him to understand. That does not make him innocent, but it does make the tragedy bigger. And this is important. Revenge stories are strongest when the ending is not just bad person loses. The strongest endings show the cost of the lie. Colette did not only lose status, she lost credibility, she lost control. She lost the husband whose silence had protected her. She lost the public image she had built so carefully. And Camden lost the illusion that his superiority was natural or deserved. Preston lost the comfort of pretending he was merely passive. Everyone lost the version of the family that depended on Maren staying quiet. But Maren gained something far more valuable than revenge. She gained ownership of her name. That is the emotional heart of this story. She did not walk into that gala just to destroy Colette. She walked in to stop being defined by someone else's lie. And there is a difference. Destruction was the result, but reclamation was the purpose. That is why Maren does not feel cruel at the end. She feels dignified. She feels controlled. She feels like a woman who finally stopped begging people to see the truth and simply placed the truth in front of them. Let's be honest. That kind of strength is not easy. People love to say, just ignore them, or don't let it bother you, or family is family. But when a family keeps repeating a lie about you, ignoring it does not always heal anything. Sometimes ignoring it only gives the lie more time to grow. Maren ignored Colette for years, not because she accepted the lie, but because she was waiting for the right way to end it. That is a very different kind of silence. One silence is fear. Another silence is strategy. And Maren's silence became strategy. This is also why the documents were so powerful. In emotional conflicts, people can deny feelings. They can say you misunderstood. They can say you are exaggerating. They can say you are making everything about yourself. But documents are different. Evidence changes the room. A DNA report does not care who is popular. A notarized statement does not care who looks elegant. Legal records do not blush, apologize, or become nervous under pressure. They simply remain what they are. And for someone like Colette, who survived by controlling perception, evidence was the one opponent she could not charm. Now I want to ask you something. What would you have done if you were Maren? Would you have exposed Colette earlier? Would you have confronted Preston privately? Would you have walked away from the family completely and never looked back? There is no easy answer. That is what makes the story feel real. Because when family is involved, pain is never simple. You can hate what they did and still grieve what you wanted from them. Maren did not only lose trust in Colette. She lost the father she believed Preston could have been. She lost years of peace. She lost the comfort of belonging without proof. And that is why Preston's apology near the end is important, but not enough. I actually like that Maren did not instantly forgive him in a beautiful emotional scene. That would have been too easy, too clean. Real healing is not like that. When someone allows 12 years of damage, one apology cannot erase it. Maren gave him honesty, not instant access. She allowed conversation, not complete restoration. And that is a mature ending. It tells the audience that forgiveness is not a performance. It is not something you hand over just because someone finally cries. Forgiveness, if it ever comes, has to respect the size of the wound. One of the strongest lines in this entire situation is when Maren tells him, "She used what you gave her." That is a hard truth. Colette used Preston's guilt, fear, and weakness. But he gave her the opportunity. He gave her silence. He gave her the space to rewrite Isla's memory. He gave her the room to humiliate Maren. And when people say, "I did not mean for it to go that far," sometimes the honest answer is, "But you let it." Intentions matter, but patterns matter more. If someone keeps getting hurt while you keep staying neutral, your neutrality is not neutral anymore. Another powerful part is Rosalie's role. She was quiet for a long time, maybe too long, but she protected the key. She remembered Isla's warning. She understood that truth needed the right hour. In many families, there is one elder who knows more than they say. Sometimes they stay silent because they are tired. Sometimes because they are afraid. Sometimes because they are waiting for the person who was hurt to be strong enough to carry the truth. Rosalie was not perfect, but when the moment came, she stood on the side of reality. Her line about being ashamed of her son and patient with her granddaughter was devastating because it finally named what everyone had avoided. And Colette's final attempt to make the matter private is something we should not miss. Notice how she was comfortable humiliating Maren in public, but the moment the truth turned against her, suddenly she wanted privacy. That is very familiar behavior. People who expose your pain for entertainment often ask for discretion when their own actions are revealed. They call your truth cruel because it interrupts their image. But Maren did not create that public moment. Colette did. Maren simply answered in the same room where she was attacked. That does not mean every conflict should be exposed publicly. We should be careful with that. But in this case, the lie had been public for years. Colette had used the family, the foundation, the gala, and the Bellamy name as part of her weapon. So the correction had to happen where the damage had been performed. Sometimes private truth cannot repair public harm. Sometimes the room that heard the lie also needs to hear the evidence. What makes this revenge satisfying is that Maren never loses herself. She does not become a mirror image of Colette. She does not insult Camden's bloodline with the same cruelty Colette used against her. In fact, when Camden reacts, Maren even recognizes that part of the damage was done to him too. That is emotional maturity. She exposes the truth, but she does not enjoy needless cruelty. She understands the difference between justice and sadism, and that difference is what keeps the audience on her side. So what can we learn from Maren Bellamy's story? First, never underestimate quiet people. Sometimes the person saying the least is the person observing the most. Second, do not mistake politeness for goodness. Colette had manners, style, and social grace, but none of that made her kind. Third, family reputation means nothing if it is built on someone's humiliation. A respected name can hide a rotten structure, and eventually truth has a way of finding the cracks. Another lesson is this: when people constantly question your place, do not spend your whole life begging them to approve your existence. At some point, you have to decide whether you want acceptance from people who benefit from doubting you. Maren wanted to belong, and that is human. But by the end, she understood that belonging to herself mattered more than being tolerated by a family that needed her small. And finally, the biggest lesson is about truth. Truth does not always arrive quickly. Sometimes it waits years. Sometimes it sits in a drawer, a box, a file, a letter, or a memory. But when truth is protected, it does not lose its power. Colette believed time would bury what she had done. Instead, time strengthened the evidence. Every year she lied made the final reveal more devastating. So, audience, I want you to think about this. Was Maren's revenge too harsh, or was it exactly what the situation demanded? Did Colette deserve to be exposed in front of everyone, or should Maren have handled it privately? And what about Preston? Can a parent repair that kind of silence, or does some damage change the relationship forever? These are the questions that make this story more than entertainment. They make us look at loyalty, courage, family, reputation, and the cost of staying quiet when someone is being erased right in front of us. For me, the most powerful part is not the DNA report. It is not even Camden's reveal. The most powerful part is Maren standing up. That single moment says everything. She stands before the proof is read. She stands before the room believes her. She stands before her father apologizes. That is where her victory begins. Not when Colette falls. Not when the audience gasps. Her victory begins when she decides she no longer needs permission to tell the truth. And that is why Maren Bellamy's ending feels complete. She does not walk away as a bitter woman chasing revenge. She walks away as someone who finally reclaimed the name they tried to make uncertain. Colette wanted her to be a question. Maren became the answer, and in the end, the woman called Illegitimate became the only person in that family standing on the solid ground of truth. And while we are talking about this, I want to know what you think. Was Maren right to expose Colette in front of everyone, or should she have kept the truth private? Share your thoughts below, because stories like this are not just meant to be watched and forgotten. They are meant to make us think about family, loyalty, silence, and the moments when truth finally has to speak. And if you enjoy emotional revenge stories with deeper commentary like this, stay connected with Pure Drama Stories, because every story here brings a new secret, a new betrayal, and a new kind of justice waiting to unfold.